Hi guys, today I'm going to make the colour Kraken. It's from the Mythical Creatures Cool set. I released the set at the beginning of the year, and Kraken was a colour that I, along with the others, made in singles, and Kraken's a beautiful mauve. So I'm going to make that today and show you how I make it. 3 colours. We've got a titanium white or titanium dioxide, 2 studio pigments from Crema, Bordeaux, and a purple. Lovely pigments to work with. Generally they set well, they don't crack. There's one layer in this one, so it's set quite nicely as it's shrunken and set quite low there. That's one layer. And with this recipe, I started off with a base mauve, which was a purple and a white, and I struggled to get that mauve the right shade, so finally got it. Right, a little bit of white. It's best to put less than more white. It's harder to go and correct the amount of white that you put in there, so you're better off to start off with less white and then add that in, because if you put too much white in, you're going to have to match, and it just, you end up chasing your tail a bit trying to get the balance right. So those are the 3 pigments I'm working with today. I've got my base binder here. Usually start off with just a basic amount of binder, and I add more if I need more, and a little extra glycerin, not too much. Too much and it will take longer to set. Mixing, so just mixing in that binder, which is like your glue, in with the pigments, as well as a little extra glycerin. And as you mix the pigments, you start to see the transformation occur right in front of you, which is quite good. But the colour you see on the plate can be very different to the colour as it sets. Whether it lightens or darkens, and as you mull, it will transform, and of course a colour may look one way but paint another. So you can see that it was quite dark to begin with, and then as I've mixed it further with just the palette knives themselves, that white is coming out. So I'm pretty happy with that. There's no hard particles in there. So now I'm ready to mull. So here is my muller. Someone asked, how do you mull? You put it onto the plate and move it around in any which way you fancy, really. There's no specific rule book on how you can move your muller around. Generally an 8 figure, because it should just pick up all the pigment on the outskirts. As it gets pushed around here, you want to just make sure you pick it up and bring it back in. And so often I will have palette knife in one hand, muller in the other. And I will just, you don't have to push too hard with the muller, because the idea is that you're dispersing and moving the pigment around together. So they should hopefully, as they're moving around, they should hopefully mix themselves. You shouldn't need to use too much pressure. It's not specifically about the grinding of the pigment. It's about the dispersing and the moving it around into the binder. I'm not wearing gloves today, just with this pigment, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be. So it's just a personal preference sometimes that I know this isn't a staining pigment. It's just that it gives me more control. So as you can see, as I'm moving that around, I'm just changing the way I move the muller itself. Here we go. So that colour is definitely transforming. Another good reason for having a palette knife in one hand while you mull with the other is when you're pushing it into the middle, you will be able to see if there's any pigments that haven't mixed in. Particles sometimes can be quite stubborn and refuse to mix in with the binder, the glue. So when you scoop it into the middle like that in a continuous motion, then you are able to find those pesky bits of pigment. But as I said earlier, these pigments are quite good to work with. Not all pigments behave this way with predictability. I haven't needed to add any extra binder in, and that just takes practice to know the amount of binder to pigment ratio. And some pigments with practice you'll learn may appear to not need the binder, but as they cure and set, they do very much need more binder. So it is just about trial and error. I would not recommend jumping into a Prussian or an alizarin crimson when first starting out. Start out with perhaps maybe an ultramarine. It's a good pigment to work with. Mica pigments are very, very easy to work with, generally. So that's pretty much the mulling. And then usually what I will do is I'll test that to check that the colour is the colour that matches Kraken. So I always have water and a paintbrush and paper to test it. I'm looking for a specific shade. So far it's looking pretty good, but what I want to do is test my colour that's sitting here, and there's no harm in testing it. It's only got one layer in it. It might be that I'm going to need to add in a little bit more white. So as you can see, I do have a little bit more work to do today with this colour. So as you can see, this is the colour that I am aiming for, and this is the colour that I have just mixed. Still really nice, but not the right shade. So I will need to add in a little bit of white. And I really just need to be very careful about how much white I add in. So I'll also add in a little bit more binder, not too much. And then I might just get straight into mulling this in. As you can see, it's already getting lighter. I just want to get that little bit of pigment off here. Let's not waste the pigment. No pigment left behind. Unless it's on the floor, then don't use it. Right. So it's already lightening up a bit. I just need to make sure I pull in that darker pigment into the middle there. There we go. Having a bigger muller does definitely save time because it reaches a larger surface area. So when I had a smaller muller, I found like that I was just spending a lot of time mulling. So having a bigger muller, it's not just about making bigger batches, it's actually also that if you're working with a smaller batch, it's covering a bigger area when dispersing. So it just makes sense that you would spend less time moving your muller around because you wouldn't be, you know, I can just move it in a motion, then it just covers a larger area. It's not cheap, but if you are going to be working with pigments a lot, it will be worth investing in a bigger size muller for that reason, to save you time. So that's just my recommendation. I'm really glad that I got a big muller. I ummed and ahed about it for a while, and yeah, great decision. So you can see I just vary the amount of movements that I do, because you want to get all that colour from the outside. Pull it in again. Right. So I will need to stop and test this soon. See how it comes out. So I've always got 2 jars of water on my desk here, and one clean, one dirty. Right, so we're getting closer. I need more white, a little bit more white and a little bit more purple to take away from that red pink colour. Right, so I've been doing lots of testing and I've got my colour sorted. I'm pretty happy with it. So that means that I can now proceed with said pigment transportation into said container. You can put your pigment into anything you want. So you can get creative. Shells, bottle caps, metal, plastic, whatever. There's lots of different kinds of shells that look really neat that you can use. Quite a few of my pigments that I keep for myself are in shells. So this is Kraken, and I will just be basically moving the pigment into the pans. The reason why I have been very flexible with the way I've mixed the pigment today, the colour itself, instead of having a rigid recipe, I actually like to have a loose recipe, and for the purpose of that is to simply experiment, explore, play. And one would think, oh gosh, that is, you know, that's a lot of time to spend trying to get that colour what it needs to be. But for me, it's actually really fun that the whole process itself, even though it might not be time effective, for me it's about the colour. You know, I will ensure that that colour is the same when I'm doing my layers, but also that I'm playing with colour and pigment ratios, etc. at the same time, recording that down and making notes, because then I can go back and replicate that particular shade that I thought looked really neat. You know, just by changing the amount of purple to white to Bordeaux ratio like I have done today. When this colour that is in front of me sets, it will darken, and that's often what happens, is that the pigment will set and darken. So that's what I will do. I will simply just literally grab the pan and then pop it in. If you make a mess, that it's great to have maybe like a wet wipe, because that's a great way to catch the mess that you may end up making around the side of the pan itself. I mean, if it's just for you, that's fine. But if you are going to sell your watercolors, then the aim is to give it a, you know, slightly tidy look, if you like. So that is Kraken that I've shown you today. If you have any questions, feel free to comment or direct message me about that. Hopefully you learned something today that you may have not known, or maybe just an affirmation of something that you were not sure about. This is my method of madness. This does not mean that it's the exact and right way to do it. It just means that this is the way that I am going to make my paints, and I'm sharing that with you, and it is totally your choice what you want to take from it. So you can take or leave what parts of it that apply to you. And that's Kraken today. So thank you for joining me. Bye.